This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you everyone for coming. We have quite an interesting topic this evening, Parshas Vayakhel. Now Vayakhel, you're thinking, should I come, should I not come again? Nachama with the Mishkan. So, we have a most interesting topic this evening. The Torah tells us, Perek Lamed Hey Pasuk Gimel, Lo Yisva'aru Eish, do not ignite a fire, do not burn a fire, B'chol Mosh V'Seichem, in all of your dwelling places, B'yom HaShabbos, on Shabbos. Don't make a fire on Shabbos, right? Simple enough. Don't, set off your igniter. Don't set off your, turn on your stove. Don't make a fire on Shabbos. Don't make a campfire. Very simple, straightforward pasuk. However, what is not so straightforward is that with all of the modern advancements, especially with the invention of electricity, discovery of the light bulb in 1879, so now how do we deal with electricity in halacha? Because the real question is, how do we define electricity? So you have to know, you look through Shas, obviously you're not going to find any discussions, any analysis on the concept of electricity. Electricity was not discovered for almost 2,000 years. But even the principles of how to apply to electricity are very unclear, because you have nothing in the Gemara, you have nothing in the Rishonim, you have nothing in the early Achronim. Even in some later Achronim, Rabbi Kiva Eger, Sam Sofer, they didn't have light bulbs, they didn't have electricity. It was first discovered in 1879. By the way, I borrowed a sefer actually, that finds a remez to the discovery of the light bulb in the Torah. We know the light bulb was discovered in the year 1879 by Edison. So that's the year 5639 of our calendar, the Jewish calendar. So the Vilna Gaon says every pasuk of the Torah corresponds to a different year of creation. So if you start in the beginning of the Torah and you count 5,639 psukim, okay, you get to the pasuk Pri admoscha v'chol yigiacha yoichal am asher lo yodata v'hayisa rak ashuk v'ratzut kol hayamim. So I just found a very good remez. It just hit me. It was like the light bulb went off. Everybody says technology makes our life so much easier, while in fact, actually, technology makes our life so much more complicated. So that's the pasuk. The pasuk 5639 is v'hayisa rak ashuk v'ratzutz kol hayamim. Anybody who has a cell phone knows that you don't have a moment of peace of mind, right? That's the pasuk. V'hayisa ak ratzutz ashuk v'ratzutz kol hayamim. That's electricity, right, David? You're masking, right? But even more than that, in the 5,639th pasuk, if every fifth letter spells out the word ma'ar, illumination. So already you have a remez in the Torah to the discovery of the light bulb. But the problem here is, how do we define, how do we quantify, how do we put our finger on electricity? Even scientists have a very hard time exactly qualifying and quantifying what is electricity. Is it a natural force? Is it a physical force? Is it somehow supernatural? How do we quantify? Is it energy? Is it light? Is it heat? What exactly is it? So if scientifically we don't know what it is, very hard to halachically be able to say whether, in fact, electricity is eish or is it not eish? Is it fire or is it not fire? So we have over here number 2, from the Encyclopedia Talmudis, the 18th volume. He just delineates for us. He says, "Hanoisei shel chashmal b'halacha." Right? In Hebrew, electricity is called chashmal. The topic of electricity in halacha, miyuchad hu b'minoi, is unique in its feature. Mikivan she'eno lav dion yasher b'talmud v'rishonim. We don't have any direct analysis in the Gemara or in the Rishonim. Hadiyon ha'hilchasi b'inyan ma'akav zeh. The halachic discussion here, Hischil rak lefnei k'tzas yoser mimei hashana, only began, a little bit over 100 years ago. Only then kirak oz hechla lehispateach ha-technologia shel ha-chashmal. That is when the technology of electricity was invented. And that's when these machines were created. And now we need to deal with what is wrong with using electricity on Shabbos, if anything. What is wrong with turning on a light on Shabbos? Everybody knows, we don't turn on a light on Shabbos. Why? Is it just customary? Is it Isser D'Rabbanan? Is it Isser D'Oraisa? How exactly do we quantify this act of turning on a light? So one of the first to discuss this shaila was the Marsham. Marsham, Rav Shalom Mordechai HaKohen Shtadron, was the grandfather of the Maggid from Yerushalayim. And in the 19th century, he was one of the Poiskei Hadar, if not the Poiskei Hadar, especially for the Hasidic Welt. They went by many of his psakim. He was very creative and ingenious in some of his heterim, but he was mamish goyin olam. And b'chol ha'olam kulai, we rely on the psak and the marsham. And the marsham, he takes a look at electricity, and you would not believe what he says. Says the marsham, I'll read it inside. V'lo yakached. This is in Chelik Beis, Siman Reish Mem Vav. I cannot deny. Ki ani choichech belibi. I sort of laugh in my heart. I am incredulous. Im behahavara v'kiboy shel ha'elektritzia yesh by malacha d'orais. I feel that according to the Torah, there is nothing wrong with turning on the lights on Shabbos. I cannot deny the fact that when I see a light switch and a light bulb, and I turn it on, I cannot deny the fact that the Torah has nothing to say about this. Nothing wrong with it. Why? Why? He's going to give 3 reasons. Take a look. Number 1. Kivan shalai hayu kamayu b'mishkan. Where do we learn out that you're not allowed to do malacha on Shabbos? We know the 39 categories of work that were needed to build the Mishkan are the 39 categories of work you're not allowed to do on Shabbos, right? It says don't do malacha 39 times. From here we learn out 39 categories of work cannot be done on Shabbos. In the Mishkan, did they have electricity? Of course not. They didn't have light bulbs. They didn't have calculators. They didn't have air conditioners. They didn't have alarm clocks. They didn't have cars. So therefore, says the Marsham, we learn out from the Mishkan what you're not allowed to do on Shabbos. They didn't have electricity in the Mishkan, so you're allowed to turn on a light on Shabbos. Well, what are you going to tell me I'm doing wrong? What am I doing that they did not do in the Mishkan? Actually, what am I doing that they did in the Mishkan? What am I doing that they didn't? I'm not doing anything. So says the Marsham, that is the first reason why it is absolutely, I feel it's permitted to use electricity on Shabbos. Number two. This is very interesting. You look a couple lines down. The first one on the line is Shamoy Led Ha'esh. He says, Mikal Makoim, Yesh Loimar, Deleka Mishum Havara V'kiboy B'chahai Gavna. You know why turning on a light is not considered Havara? You know why it's not considered Eish? Shaharei Einoi Eish Mamish. Because a light bulb is not actually fire. Ve'einoi Soirev Hachut Barzel. It does not burn the iron thread. Now what's that talking about? You ever saw a light bulb? So everybody knows. What illuminates of the light bulb? You have the filament. Right? You have the 2 wires that connect to the filament. Filament is a very, very thin wire. It's almost... What? Yeah. In the incandescent bulbs. So, which is an extremely thin wire, almost too thin to be able to contain the energy. And as the energy is coming onto the filament, what happens? It heats up, it begins to glow, and it turns white hot. Now actually, the filament is hotter if you have an electric oven. Right? So the electric oven, it turns what? Red hot. The filament is actually much hotter than an electric oven. So why is your light bulb, why doesn't it feel as hot? Well, because you have the glass covering. But the wire, the filament, gets really hot, gets very hot, it gets white hot, it heats up, and it glows. But says the Marsham, is the fire consuming the filament? Is the filament burning? V'hine, it's boyer ba'esh. V'hine einenu ukal. It's burning, but it's not being consumed. One of the main properties of fire is the fire has to burn and consume something. So if the light bulb is actually not burning anything, it's not consuming anything. So it's not consuming it does not have the property of fire. If it doesn't have the property of fire, then it's not considered Eish. It's not considered Eish. It's not considered real fire. And that is the second reason, says the Marsham, why he is inclined to say, Min D'Oraisa, there's nothing wrong with turning on a light bulb on Shabbos. And finally, says the Marsham, something which is very hard to understand. A third reason why, perhaps according to Torah, it would be permitted to turn on a light on Shabbos, is the following. And that is, even after you've extinguished the light bulb, it always retains its ability to light up again. So it's never really on or off. Its lighting ability is always maintained. These are the words of the Marsham. The Marsham says, a couple lines down, V'gami nema, even if you're going to say, D'shayich behavara, that it is burning, Mikal makam yesh loymar, you could say, D'leka mishum kiboy. Even if you extinguish it, Marsham wants to say, if you turn off a light, that's not considered extinguishing a fire on Shabbos, because even after you put it out, it still retains its ability to burn. So the Marsham is telling us three very interesting things about fire and about electricity in his opinion. He says when you turn on a light bulb, you know why we can make the case that it's not prohibited min Torah? Because they did not have electricity and light bulbs in the Mishkan. Number two, you know why perhaps it could be permitted? Because the fire does not burn and consume. Right? If it would burn and consume, you know how long your light bulb would last for? A second, a minute. You turn on the light, all of a sudden, pew! It would explode.
Sometimes it does.
Sometimes it does. Right? But most light bulbs, they last for at least 10 minutes, right? So it's supposed to last for many, many hours. So the fact that it lasts so long means it doesn't burn, it doesn't consume. And then the Marsham says, and if you put it out, it's also not considered extinguishing a fire. Why not? Because it always retains the ability to relight. Now, Rabbi, so you have to know that this tshuva of the Marsham is not accepted. It is not accepted la halacha, and we're going to try to explain why. Regarding the point that he made, that this fire does not consume, we have the first tshuva on this is Shas Tshuva's Malamed Lahayel of Rav David Tzvi Hoffman, one of the German Gedolim of the last 200 years, and he says the following. He quotes a great scholar, Rabbi Yosef Halevi, who says, think about the following. He says that it doesn't burn, it doesn't consume. If it doesn't consume anything, if your light bulb is not consuming anything, then it shall last forever. Why doesn't a light bulb last forever? Now listen to what he says, and you'll see, you get a little idea for how cheap they make products today. Says Reb David Tzvi Hoffman, he's talking about 100 years ago. He says, why is it that our light bulbs are only lasting between 15,000 to 20,000 hours? Imagine, you turn on the light and you let it go for 3 years. Right? They did not have, the energy-saving bulbs back then, right? They had regular... So he says, why is it that their bulb, they didn't have fluorescent either, or LEDs, or LCDs, or the L, right? They didn't have any of that. So why is it that our bulbs only last between 15,000 to 20,000 hours? So when they say, look at our products, look how long they last, you see, no. When they used to make products, they knew how to make them. You know why they last only so long? Because a little bit of the filament burns each and every time. So you may not see it, it may be negligible, but something is burning, something is combusting. And therefore, that's Eish, it's fire. The Torah never gives a shiur how much has to burn. As long as you have something that heats up and destroys and burns, so that's fire. Oh, whether it burns a lot or it burns a little, there's no shiur, there's no amount, and therefore says the Malamed Lahayel, it is burning something. And he says the following. He says, what's the reason why your light bulb does not really burn? What's the reason why it doesn't burn? Does anybody know? Why doesn't a light bulb burn?
No oxygen.
No oxygen, very good. There's no oxygen in the light bulb, right? In order for something to burn, the heat needs to react with chamtzan. You know what chamtzan is? Oxygen. It needs to burn, it needs to react with the oxygen. So how do they make a light bulb? They have the filament, and then they create a vacuum where they remove, right? You're an electrician, right? I got this right so far? If I don't get it right, don't tell me, right? But I'm talking about the old. Yes, exactly. That's correct. Yeah. So the light bulb is a vacuum, has a vacuum. They remove the oxygen. The oxygen is vacuumed out. They create a vacuum, and that's why it doesn't burn. However, says the Malam Lahaya, there has to be some oxygen in there, because if there's no oxygen in there, then you won't be able to turn on the light. Like somebody who tries to light his cigarette on the moon can't get it started, right? Because there's no oxygen at all on the moon. So how does your light bulb burn? There has to be some negligible amount of oxygen in the incandescent bulb. And he says further, when the Torah says don't light a fire, does the Torah say don't light a fire that the fire could last? Torah never says that. The Torah just says don't ignite the fire. Whether it lasts for 3 hours, or 30 days, or even a millisecond. The Torah says don't ignite it. So the Torah says don't ignite it. When you have the electric current going into the filament, it ignites, it burns, even if it burns a negligible amount, that is considered havara. And that is the conclusion of Rav David Tzvi Hoffman, that an incandescent bulb is eish midoraisa, is biblically fire. And by the way, you should know, bottom line, this is the consensus of the poskim. Turning on a light bulb, the consensus of the poskim is a full-fledged fire midoraisa. Despite the fact that Marsham disagrees, we don't hold like the Marsham. The consensus of the poskim is, which would mean you should know that the same way, think about how careful a person would be not to light a real fire on Shabbos. Right? Would anybody even mistakenly, accidentally go over to a lighter and flick it on Shabbos? I don't think anyone here, or an observant Jew, would even forget and lighter, because a lighter is such a full-fledged fire that nobody would even accidentally. And yet, even observant Jews, and everybody knows, it will happen. In the middle of the night, you forget, you turn on the light. Why? Because somehow we don't have the full realization, and we're talking at a Shomrei Torah Mitzvahs, a light bulb, la halacha, is a full-fledged fire. And the same way you wouldn't wake up in the middle of the night and start winnow, or start plow, or start baking, or start cooking, you got to be that removed from flicking on your light on Shabbos. Okay. But the Tzitz Eliezer is even more on the attack on the Marsham than the Malamed Lahaya was. And he says the following. He says Marsham has 3 basic premises. Number 1, that it's not considered Malacha D'Oraisa because they didn't have light bulbs in the Mishkan. So we have to deal with that. Right? That's a serious question. How could we make the case that turning on a light bulb is a full-fledged fire? They did not have light bulbs in the Mishkan. But that was the first premise of the Marsham. Number 2, the Marsham said, it's not really fire because it doesn't consume. And number 3, the Marsham wanted to say if you put it out, it's not considered extinguishing because it could always, the power of fire is always latent in it. Says the Tzitz Eliezer, Rebbe Lezer Yehuda Waldenberg. He says like this. The Marsham obviously has no understanding of how electricity works. And he says this, he says the Marsham did not investigate thoroughly the way electricity works, and the Tzitz Eliezer explains to us how electricity causes a light bulb to work. You ready for this? He says the following. You have an electrical current. Okay? What creates electrical current? Tzitz Eliezer says a generator. Okay? Now the generator is either you have the magnet in the middle and the wire coil around it, or you have the wire coil in the middle and you have the magnet around it. When a wire is exposed to a magnetic field, it creates a current. How it creates a current, I don't know. I'm not a physicist, but that is one of the fundamental laws of the universe. When a wire is exposed to magnetic field, it produces a current, right? Produces a current. That current is then a force. The force goes. Usually electricity flows from positive to negative. Or in Hebrew, it's called positive to negative. Or positive to Fs. So let's say, or the same thing in a battery-operated flashlight. You have the battery, you have the positive end, you have the negative end. Electricity is going to flow from the positive to the negative. Fine.
It's exactly like water.
Okay, exactly. You're right. Water is a good analogy. Water pump is a very good analogy. But it starts to flow. It starts to flow from the generator through the wires. Okay. Now, Rabbi said you have to know that tonight we're not discussing the electrical current. According to the consensus of Poskim, an electric current itself is not a fire midaraisa. It's not a fire. It's a force of nature. However, as the electrical current is flowing through your house, through the wires, ready, it's about to go into your light bulb, it's flowing freely through the wires, from positive to negative. It gets to the light bulb, to the filament. The filament is an extremely flimsy, thin wire. Try pushing water is a good analogy, through a small pipe, and then try pushing it through a big pipe. It's a lot harder to stuff water through a small pipe than through a big pipe. So when you're trying to get the water into the small pipe, it's going to require more energy. So as the electric current gets to the filament, so you have all this electrical power, it's getting through the filament, it can barely squeeze through, the filament is so flimsy. To get through the filament, it has to exert so much energy, it starts to heat up and get hotter and hotter and hotter. Through some type of friction, it heats up, it gets white hot, it starts to glow. That's how you produce the light of a light bulb. So says the Tzitz Eliezer. First of all, the Marsham is saying that this filament has independent fire. It's not true. The Marsham did not investigate properly what electricity is. Electricity is not created in a light bulb. It's created in the generator. It flows through the wires. It reaches the filament. The filament cannot contain the electrical flow. The friction causes it to heat. The extra energy causes it to heat, to glow, and to illuminate. So says the Tzitz Eliezer, for one moment, please, take the piece of paper and put it on your electrical stove. Your electrical, right? What's going to happen to that piece of paper? Bam! It's going to burn up immediately. Says Tzitz Eliezer. So that's not a fire? Of course it's a fire. It could burn anything that comes into contact with it as quickly as a regular fire. So it does have the capacity to burn. And even more than that. So you say it has the capacity to, but your light bulb is not actually burning anything. The reason why it's not burning, Rabbi Sai, is only because the conditions of the filament do not allow it to burn because there's no oxygen. So it's not that it's not a fire. It is a fire. It just does not have an ingredient which will allow it to burn. So it's missing oxygen. So says the Tzitz Eliezer, Haga be'atzmacha. If a guy would light a campfire on the moon, and he got it to flick on for 1 second, of course he would be chayiv. What? Because it extinguishes right away, he wouldn't be chayiv? The oxygen is only needed to get it to continue to burn. But a light bulb is fire like any fire in the world. The filament, because of the exerted energy, it gets warmer, it heats up, it lights up, it glows, so it's fire. So it says it sits there, so it doesn't matter whether it's generated by a generator, it doesn't matter if it's a handheld flashlight, you turn on your flashlight, so you have one end, the top end of the battery, the positive is connected to a wire, the energy flows out of the battery, through the positive wire, it's flowing through the bulb, and back out through the negative side. So as the energy, again, is going to the filament, it's pushing through, it's exerting through, it illuminates, it heats up, it illuminates, it's fire like any fire in the world. Says it Tzitz Eliezer. Very interesting. If you look, turn over your pages, on the bottom right-hand portion, he says, the truth is, all the words of the Marsham have been pushed away. Ki hametzius mara, reality shows. She'ein miteva hadvarim kain. This is not the nature of electricity. Ella hahavara hi havara amitis. When a bulb burns, it is true fire. Haba v'noitzeres meha generator. It comes from the generator hayoitzeres hachashmal that creates electricity al yedei pigia b'shivshuv shel shnei minei chamarim. Okay, this is just a general idea, but the generator, through the electromagnetic force, it creates the flow. And therefore, the Tzitz Eliezer concludes, look about 5 paragraphs to the end of number 5. Acharei kol hadvar ma'ela, after everything we've mentioned, Chalila lanu lahakel b'nidain hadlakas v'kiva orach hashmal. Heaven forbid for a person to be lenient to turn on the light bulb, because this in fact is an Isser D'Oraisa. If the Beis Hamikdash was standing, and we had 2 witnesses who warned somebody, don't turn on the incandescent bulb, and the guy says, I'm going to do it anyway, you get capital punishment. This would be a capital offense. Says the Tzitz Eliezer, but they didn't have it in the Mishkan. Rabbi said, this is one of my favorite chidushim I've heard in a long time. What melachos do we learn out from the Mishkan? All of them. All of the melachos. How do we learn out from the Mishkan? Because it says 39 times, don't do malacha. It says 39 times, don't do malacha. So whatever they did to create the Mishkan, you're not allowed to do on Shabbos. Does it say anywhere in the Torah you're not allowed to winnow? No. Does it say anywhere you're not allowed to plant? No. Does it say anywhere you're not allowed to plow? No. But whatever they did in the Mishkan, we're not allowed to do. But they didn't have light bulbs in the Mishkan. Says the Tzitz Eliezer, there is one thing on Shabbos that you're not allowed to do, nothing irrespective of whether they did it or didn't do it in the Mishkan. And you know what that is? Lighting a fire. You know why? Because it's the only malacha where the Torah says, Loi sevaru eish dechol ma'shvaisechem b'yom HaShabbos. So all the other 38 malachos, we learn out. Whatever they did in the Mishkan, we're now to do. But when it comes to making a fire, the Torah doesn't rely on the fact that, they did it in the Mishkan, we're now to do it. The Torah says explicitly, don't make a fire on Shabbos. That means any kind of fire. The kind they had in the Mishkan, the kind they have in 2013, fluorescent, LED, LCD, anything that perhaps would be a fire, and we'll have to discuss whether that is or not, but certainly an incandescent bulb. The fact that they didn't have in the Mishkan doesn't matter, because it's the one malacha on Shabbos that there's an explicit pasuk you're not allowed to do. Very interesting. And says the Tzitz Eliezer, after I said this chiddush, I was mechaven to Reb Tzvi Pesach Frank, also had this insight that because the Torah explicitly says, it doesn't matter if they did it this way in the Mishkan, they didn't do this way, irrespective, you can't make any fire on Shabbos. And therefore, the Paisek, the earliest Paisek, who writes most definitively about turning on light bulbs on Shabbos was the Beis Yitzchak. Now, the Beis Yitzchak may not be so well known. We quoted him last week, Rabbi Yitzchak Shmelkesh. But in his time, he was the Paisek Hador. And he writes that an electric bulb is so much considered fire that if you flick on your electric bulb right before Shabbos, you make a bracha. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kedeshanu b'mitzvos v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Shabbos. That it's eish mamish. There is no difference at all between a light bulb and a regular fire. And he paskened. You look in Shas Shus Beis Yitzchak Yerodei Chelik Beis Lam Naf, look number 6. Beis Yitzchak paskens that if you turn on a gas light or an electronic light, you make the bracha lahadlik ner shel Shabbos. Because it's a fire, like any fire.
So instead of candles, you can use it.
Yes, that's what he says. Now, by the way, I just want to point out, Rav Moshe said that you don't make a bracha. Why you don't make a bracha? Unclear. Rav Moshe says you don't make a bracha, but he does say, let's say a woman's in a hospital and they're not going to let her light the candles, she should turn on the light to be yotze, the mitzvah of Hadlakas Ner Shabbos. By the way, and also in Rav Moshe's house, you should know, when his wife would light Ner Shabbos, she would turn off the lights first. Because what are you lighting a candle? You have a candle already. You have the bulbs. In Rav Moshe's house, they would turn off the lights before, and then she would have in mind in the bracha, it goes on both. That's what they did. And that's what Rav Moshe did. Very interesting. So, do you make a bracha just on the lights? The Beis Yitzchak says yes, others say yes. Rav Moshe says not to. It's not in the Tshuvas, it's quoted. But in Rav Moshe's house, you should know, they did turn off the lights before Hadlakas Ner Shabbos, and both were included in the mitzvah. Okay. So Rabbi say, that is the consensus of the poskim, that a incandescent bulb is eish midairaisa. So you want to know, what about a fluorescent bulb or these other LCD, LDs? Well, those operate differently. And the way those operate is the electric current will excite a gas, and the gas will illuminate. Now, is that eish midairaisa? No. No, it's not eish midairaisa. It's not heating up. The metal, there's no metal that's heating up. It's a gas that shines when it reacts to the electric current. That is not eish midairaisa. And it makes a difference. Now, you can't turn it on. Halacha l'maaseh cannot turn it on. But it makes a difference. You have a choyle, amira la'akum. Now, you should know, by the way, Rabbi say, turning on an incandescent bulb is an Isser D'Oraisa, which means you can't get a guy to turn it on for you. There's a misconception. You know, if I left my lights off Friday night, I could just call a guy. You can't call a guy. That's Amir La'akum. That's a classic case of Amir La'akum. But other electrical appliances, which may not be an Isser D'Oraisa, Amir La'akum could be permitted, providing you have other circumstances. But on a pure light bulb, you're stuck. A pure light bulb is an Isser D'Oraisa. Can't just go, okay, fine. So Rabbi say, if I were to ask you then, if a light bulb is an Isser D'Oraisa, can you turn on a light bulb or a cell phone during a shiur, or a light bulb on Shabbos? Could you turn on a light bulb, on Yom Tif? Are you allowed to turn on a light bulb on Yom Tif?
Is it from a pre-existing flame?
So I would say off the bat, if the whole reason you're not allowed to turn on a light on Shabbos is fire, everybody knows you're allowed to use fire on Yom Tif. Alright? Oichel nefesh is mutter, which means that whatever you need, a malacha that's needed for food, that's permitted. And mitoch shehutra l'tzarech oichel nefesh, hutra nami shalai l'tzarech. Maybe you could turn on a light on Yom Tif. So you say, no, you can't turn on a light on Yom Tif. You know why? Because even though you're allowed to use fire on Yom Tif, but you're not allowed to create a new fire on Yom Tif. Why not? So creating a new fire on Yom Tif is not an Isser D'Oraisa, it's Isser D'Rabbanan. What's the Isser D'Rabbanan? And it makes a big difference. If you forgot to turn on your fire for Shabbos, you can't call a guy and turn it on. But what am I going to eat? Cereal and milk. That's what you're going to eat on Shabbos. If your fire is off, you cannot tell a guy to turn it on Shabbos. But on Yom Tif, you could. Why? Because turning on a fire on Yom Tif is only an Isser D'Rabbanan of Moiled. So if you don't have anything to eat, but Makam Sarach, you can ask the guy to turn it on. Because it's only an Isser D'Rabbanan. Okay? What's the Isser D'Rabbanan of making a new fire on Yom Tif? Take a look on your sheets. On number 21. So the Mishnah says in Masechta Beya, Ein moitzian es ha'ar. You're now to take out a new fire. V'loy min ha'yetzim, not from wood. V'loy min ha'avanim, and not from stones. V'loy min ha'afar, and not from dirt. In other words, you can't bang the two sticks together. You can't bang the two stones together. You can't, if sometimes there's very hard, dry earth, and you excavate the earth, it causes sparks. You can't do that on Yom Tif. V'loy min hara'afim, v'loy min hamayim. You cannot produce a new fire on Yom Tif. A new fire on Yom Tif. Says Rashi, why? Mishum de moiled. You know what's wrong with it? It's moiled. Moiled means to create a new entity. So a fire, you're allowed to use fire on Yom Tif. You could transfer fire on Yom, but you cannot create a new fire on Yom Tif. It's moiled. By the way, there are a lot of, an example of moiled would be like this. The Ramah says, people want to wear cologne. Why? I'm not sure. But anyway, but you can't put cologne on clothing on Yom Tif. You can put it on your skin. You can't put it on clothing or perfume. Because putting perfume or cologne on clothing is giving the clothing like a new facelift, a new image, a new scent. And that's considered making a new entity on Yom Tov. That's a Isser D'Rabbanan of Moiled. People have to know. It's an Isser D'Rabbanan of Moiled to put, whoa, what could be wrong? Just put it up. Can't do it on Yom Tov.
But if you put in the skin, it's going to go.
Okay.
Don't put it in the clothing.
Keep it in the bottle. But if you have to remove it from the bottle, then you should put it in this. Then it's just,
put it on the skin.
Yeah.
Don't put it on the clothing.
So I'm saying you could do that, but if you want to put it on the clothing, you can put it on the clothing. Okay, fine. That's another example. So therefore, the halacha is one cannot create a new fire on Yom Tif midrabanan. midrabanan. So could you turn on your light on Yom Tif? What would we say then? No. Fuck, turning on a light bulb is an isser of fire, is a fire. To turn on the light bulb on Yom Tif should be an isser rabbanan moiled. However, Rabbi Vadia Yosef, and you're going to help me here now. Rabbi Yosef, number 26, in the Yechavadas, Chelek Aleph Siman Lamed Beis, he brings down from the Shas Tshuvas Even Yikara in the second paragraph, that you're allowed to turn on a light bulb on Yom Tif. You know why? Because we said you're not allowed to make a new fire on Yom Tif, but you're allowed to make a fire bigger on Yom Tif. So says the Sefer Shas Tshuvas Even Yikara, when you're turning on a light bulb, you're just making the fire bigger. How? Because the electric current was in the wire. So the fire was in the wire. And now the fire is just extending a little bit. So says the Even Yikara, you're just extending the fire so you could turn on the light on Yom Tif. But based on the shiur tonight, it should be obvious that that's not correct. Why? Because an electric current is not a fire. The only thing that's a fire is when the electric current hits the filament, can't really get through without the extra energy, so it heats up and it illuminates. So there was no fire before you turned on the switch. So to say that turning on a light on Yom Tov is just making the fire bigger is clearly not correct in reality. In other words, you're not making a fire bigger. According to what we're saying, an electrical current is not a fire. The illuminated filament is a fire, so you're not being moisef al eish, you're creating a new eish, and that is why Rabbi Vadia Yosef sides with the Shas Tshuvas Keren LeDavid, the Satmar Dayan, who writes clearly that if you understand how electricity works, you would see you're not adding to a fire when you turn on a light bulb, you're creating a new fire, and therefore, turning on a light bulb on Yom Tov should be what? Isser d'Rabbanan of Moiled. So that's what we're holding so far. Turning on a light on Shabbos is an Isser d'Oraisa of Havara. Turning on a light bulb on Yom Tov is an Isser d'Rabbanan of Moiled. Okay, that's another shiur. I'm not going to discuss that. That's a different topic about making higher and lower. Okay, it's a very good question. Okay, but we're not going to get into that. Today we're talking black and white today, okay? Comes along, this is really mind-boggling, comes along, there's a sefer, an old journal, an old Torah journal. You know, nowadays you have all these Torah journals. You have a Hamar, you have Hapardes, you have many Ja'am HaTorah. There was an old Torah journal called Kol Torah. And all the Gedolei Yisrael used to write in it, including Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank. And Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank writes in the journal Kol Torah, 1934. Okay, we have it on the sheets. He writes, take a look at number 14, that you're allowed to turn on the light on Yom Tov. Why? So says Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank, why are you now to turn on Shabbos? It's Eish. Why are you now to turn on Yom Tov? It's Moiled. However, says Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank, when you turn on the light bulb, are you creating the fire directly or indirectly? It's indirectly. Why? Because until you turn on the switch, there is an impediment. The current cannot flow. The wires are not connected. So what? By you turning on the switch, you're merely connecting the circuit. You're merely making the wires go straight up. So that's grama. That's indirect. So grama on regular fire on Shabbos is also will be also midrabanan. But grama on moiled on Yom Tov, it's mutter. Grama on Yom Tov is mutter. I'm not making the fire. The electric current is there. There's something blocking. There's a space. So I'm just filling in the space. That's called indirectly allowing the current to flow through and then through the filament. That's grama by moiled. Mutter lechatchila, says Rav Tzvi Bezang, you could turn on the light on Yom Tov. 1 second. Who else agrees with the Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank? You're going to flip. The Aruch HaShulchan, in a journal, also written, about 80 years ago, a journal is called Kovetz Beis Vad L'Chachamim. The Aruch HaShulchan writes that the whole Isra of making a fire on Yom Tov is only moiled, but you're not making it directly. And we know, look at number 13, on Shabbos and Yom Tov, it says, Lo saseh kol melacha, don't do any work. Asiyahu da aser, doing it is aser. Grama shari, indirect is mutter. So on Yom Tov, it's grama b'moilid, it's mutter. Now this is heavy stuff. The Aruch HaShulchan, before the Mishnah Berurah, everybody followed the Aruch HaShulchan. Now it's a little bit curious that the Aruch HaShulchan never wrote this in the Aruch HaShulchan. And legend has it that he retracted this psak. But we only see what we see. He wrote the psak. So again, the logic he's using is that when you flip on the light switch, you're not directly making the fire. The electric current is there. There's something in between. You're merely filling in the gap. That is called grama. Now, Rabbi Sai, we come to the home run. This, in my mind, this tshuva knocks the ball out of the park, really carries the day. Really the clearest understanding of how electricity works. And this is from Reb Chaim Oizer Grzinski in Shas Tshuvas Achiezer. Okay? Chaim Oizer was the Gadol Adar pre-war Europe. Chaim, they say he was able to answer the phone, right? One shuva in his right hand, one shuva in his left hand. Okay? Chaim Oizer starts off like this. By the way, you should know, Reb Chaim Oizer did not like all of this discussion about electricity. When Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach was a young man, his first work was Ma'orei Eish. Now, when they reprinted it, who gave him a haskama to the Ma'orei Eish? Avram Yitzchak HaKohen Kook, Chaim Oizer Grzinski. Now, Reb Chaim Oizer writes that I'm not such a big fan of all of this pilpul about electricity as if it's debatable. You know what you should write? Asur, and that's it. Because once, we get together and we have supper and we talk about electricity and we drink some Sprite, so now it's a discussion. Yeah, no, this opinion, that opinion, and you have your rabbi, I have my rabbi. Reb Chaim Oizer says, no, we don't discuss. Electricity is asur. But once he wrote it, I'll give him a haskama. That's what he said. Okay, just for the sake of truth, when they reprinted the Ma'orei Eish of Rav Shlomo Zalman, Rav Yitzchak HaKohen Kook's haskama was removed. And now they reprinted it 2 volumes, it's back in. But you should know, Rav Shlomo Zalman went to Rav Kook for haskama. In any event...
Wait, Rav Kook's haskama was removed or Rav Chaim Ozer's was removed?
No, Rav Kook. Okay. So Rabbi Sai, Rav Achiezer starts off saying like this. Yes, an incandescent light bulb is full-fledged fire. But maybe it's a grama. And maybe it's analogous to the following case in Masechta Sanhedrin. You have a guy, he shoots an arrow at his friend. Reuven is shooting an arrow at Shimon. And Shimon's holding a shield. So did Reuven do anything wrong? No, of course not. It's going to hit the shield. Nothing's going to happen. Levi comes along and removes the shield. Says the Gemara, the guy who shot the arrow is patur. Now, meanwhile, Shimon dropped dead. Reuven shot the arrow at Shimon, right? Levi came along, removed the shield. Shimon dropped dead. Levi is patur. Reuven is patur. The guy who shoots the arrow, what? Reuven says, I shot the arrow, but he had a shield. Levi says, what did I do wrong? I didn't kill him. The arrow killed him. I just removed the shield. The halacha is they both walk home scot-free. Reuven goes home and eats his cholent. Levi goes home and eats his cholent with kishka, everything. They with a full, clear conscience. Why? Because Reuven shot an arrow at a shield, and Levi didn't shoot an arrow. He just removed the shield. It's grama. He didn't cause Levi didn't cause Shimon to get shot. Levi just removed the impediment. So says Reb Chaim Oizer, maybe in this case when you turn on the light switch, what you're doing is, you have 2 wires, but in between there's an empty space, there's a blockage. By turning on the light switch, you're removing the blockage. So you're removing the blockage, that's not lighting a fire, that's grama. You're removing the blockage. Says Reb Chaim Oizer, that's not how it works. It's not that your light switch is removing a blockage. Your light switch is connecting the 2 ends of the wire. You're not removing a blockage. You're creating a connection. You're making something. That's an asiyah. That's making the fire. It's not removal of a blockage. It's creating a fire. So Reb Chaim Ozer says, so I have a great idea. We'll just make it work a little differently. Instead of making it that when the light switch goes on, it connects the two wires, we'll make it that you have two wires with something stuck in between, and the light switch just removes the blockage, and then it will be a grama and it will be mutter. Says Reb Chaim Ozer, even if that would be the case, it would still be an Isser D'Oraisa. Why? But why is that not analogous to Reuven shooting an arrow at Shimon and Levi taking the shield away? Listen very carefully. Because there's another case. That Gemara that we mentioned is in Masechta Sanhedrin, Ayin Zayin Amud Beis. The Gemara, a little bit down, on the bottom of the page, brings another case. You ready for this? Shimon's lying on the floor, and right next to him is the Hoover Dam. He's lying right, you have the Hoover Dam right over here, and Shimon's lying on the floor. And Reuven comes along, and he ties up Shimon. So now Shimon is there, tied up beneath the Hoover Dam. Then Shimon takes his hammer, and he knocks down the Hoover Dam. Yeah, whoever, the bad guy comes, and he knocks down the Hoover Dam, and Shimon is washed away. Says the Gemara, in this case, Reuven is chayiv. You hear the case? The case is, you have a guy, he's lying next to the dam, and Reuven comes, ties him up, and then removes the dam. So in that case, Reuven is chayiv. Why? Because he caused the dam to overflow and wash Shimon away. So as Reb Chaim Ozer, we have two cases in the Gemara that are exactly the same, and the Gemara Seiser itself. First, the Gemara says that if Reuven shoots an arrow at Shimon, you have to listen very carefully to this. This is the whole Shiur. If Reuven shoots an arrow to Shimon, and Shimon's holding a shield, and a guy comes and knocks away the shield, the guy's pater, because he just removed a maniya. He didn't create anything, he just removed a blockage. And yet, if Reuven comes, ties Shimon up, and then removes the dam, which is also a blockage, it's also blocking the water, he's chayiv. So what's the difference between removing a shield from an arrow and removing a dam from water? It's the exact same thing. Right? See? So, what are you tying up? You're not chayiv for tying someone up. No, it doesn't matter. So the Yad Ramah on that Gemara, and the Rishonim on that Gemara asks this question, and listen carefully, and he says there's a fundamental difference between removing someone's shield from an arrow and removing a dam that is blocking the water. What's the difference? You shoot the arrow at the shield. The guy who removes the shield, is he removing the shield when the arrow is pressed up against the shield? If the arrow would first hit the shield and then the guy would remove the shield, what do you think would happen to the arrow? It would just fall down. It's not like an arrow from the cartoons where it's like battery motored arrow, it just keeps on going. You shoot an arrow at a shield, once it hits the shield, the arrow is going to drop. The only way that removing a shield is going to accomplish anything is if you remove the shield before the arrow gets there. So Reuven comes along, removes the shield. Meanwhile, where's the arrow? It's on its way. So the removal of the shield is only removing an interference. But the arrow has not yet got there. So removal of an interference is only a grama and is pater. But in the case of the dam, where the water is 10 miles up the river, the water is pressed up against the dam. When you remove the dam, the water immediately falls down. So you could look at the removal of the dam as activating the water. You're not just removing an interference, says Reb Chaim Ozer. But in a case where the item that's going to cause the damage is pressed up against the interference, by removing the interference, you're activating the action. You're not just removing an interference. By a shield, you remove the shield, but the arrow has a life of its own. The arrow is its own person, its own entity. Eventually the arrow will get there. It's a grama. But in the case of the dam, where the water is pressed up against the dam, sometimes by removing an interference, it activates the action. If it activates it, you acted. You did it. You did it. You caused the water to fall on him. You didn't just remove the thing that's blocking the water from falling on him. By the shield, you removed the thing that's blocking the arrow from hitting the guy. By the dam, by removing the interference, you caused the water to fall on. That's not a grama. That's an asiyah. So therefore, says Reb Chaim Ozer, coming back to electricity, when you flick on the light switch, is the electricity saying, oh, thanks for making the path for me. I'll be right over. I'll get there in a moment. No. The electricity is there, pressed up right to the very end, to where you are connecting the two wires. So the moment you make the connection, you're not just removing the interference, you're activating the electricity. So it's not a grama. You're causing it. You're causing it. You're doing it. Grama is when you remove the shield. When you remove the shield, take away the shield, now the arrow, which was set into motion on its own, has the opportunity and ability to get there. When you remove the dam, imagine like this. A guy, he has a gun that as soon as you remove the sheath, all of a sudden the bullet comes flying out. So imagine a guy, he walks over to his friend, he uncovers the sheath and the bullet comes flying out. Is that guy a grama? Is that a grama? Of course it's not a grama. If the removal of the sheath allows the bullet to come out immediately, that's exactly like shooting it. Sometimes, where if the act happens immediately with the removal of the interference, that's an action. So says Reb Chaim Ozer, his psak is, turning on a light bulb on Shabbos is a full-fledged creation of fire, not a minhag, not a drabanan, an isser daraisa. But what do you mean it's indirect? It's not indirect. It's an absolute asiyah, an absolute action. And then coming back to Yom Tif, says Reb Chaim Ozer, Yom Tif would be an isser drabanan of moiled. But isn't it grama on moiled? No, it's not grama on moiled. It's actual moiled. The Aruch HaShulchan wrote in some journal, it's grama moiled. Says Reb Chaim Ozer, he's wrong. Finished. And that's his conclusion. So says Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, this is how we paskin, like the Achiezer. That fire, light bulb on Shabbos, this is a raisa. On Yom Tiv, in Egypt, the chief rabbi, Harav Aaron ben Shimon, said you could turn on the light bulb on Yom Tiv, and the Aruch HaShulchan said it, and the Reb Tzvi Pesach Frank. But the Achiezer said not like that. And we paskin like the Achiezer. So listen to what he says. Even though I know there are communities in USA where people are turning on lights on Yom Tif, says Rabbi Ovadia, there are poskim who say you could do that. And therefore, you can't be moicha strongly against people who turn on... Now this is for Sfardim. For Ashkenazim, I'm not aware of anybody who's willing to say that there's no Isser Drabanan of turning on a light bulb on Yom Tif like the Achiezer. But Rabbi Ovadia does acknowledge all the poskim we mentioned, and he says, somebody who you see, you don't throw tomatoes at them. But, he says, you should explain them very softly the following. In life, in business, in the real world, whenever you have two paths to take, you always try to take the safest path. Should I go? Should I not go? Well, that way has danger. But it's not really dangerous. It's very unlikely. No, everybody knows you avoid danger. So if you avoid danger in the real world, says Rav Ovadia, but that world is really the fake world. The real world is the road to Olam Haba. You have to take the safe path. And the safe path is, whether you're Ashkenazi or Sephardi, you can't turn on the light bulb on Yom Tov. Why? Because we paskin like the Achiezer. The Klal Yisrael has, so to speak, accepted this viewpoint of the Achiezer, that turning on a light is not indirect, it's active. By you connecting the circuits, you are actively causing the fire. Now, Rabbi, I want you to know, we only discussed one aspect of electricity. You have, Mirz Hashem, we're going to speak by Shalshudas this week, or Friday in the Young Israel. We're going to speak about other aspects of fire. You have the Chazon Ish. Chazon Ish said that turning on other aspects of electricity. Chazon Ish said electricity is boines, building. Others say it's a different type of moiled. So bottom line is, turning on an incandescent bulb is an Isser D'Oraisa. That's how we come out. You can't do it biblically. Other electrical appliances, in most cases, if there are no lights, would be an Isser D'Rabbanan. Would be an Isser D'Rabbanan. On Yom Tif, our opinion is, same thing, it would be an Isser D'Rabbanan to use a light bulb or electrical appliances on Yom Tif. But this gives you a little bit of an appreciation, also, just to re-emphasize the Chiddush of the Tzitz Eliezer, that all the malachos we learn out from the Mishkan except for one, and that is a fire. A fire is the only malacha where the Torah says, don't light a fire on Shabbos, which goes to teach you that whether it's exactly like they did in the Mishkan or a little bit different, nevertheless, anything that falls under that general category is a malacha on Shabbos. Rabbi Sai, thank you for coming. Thank you for listening.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.